Ladies and gentlemen, ATDF everything in that shelf presentation. You're now rocking with TDF everything. Spoiled rotten.
Spoiler alert.
Welcome back, everybody.
Hey.
It's me, Daniel,
And it's banned
on Spoiled Rotten.
on that shelf. Boom.
Yeah, boom. So we're doing the Avengers right away, as
Yeah.
we have had to do with a bunch of these movies.
Mhm.
Yeah, Joss Whedon and shit.
Yeah. We're saying that right off the bat. We're
that's-
recording this the week of.
You're not going to hear this anytime around the time that this has happened,
Yeah.
but Charisma
Context.
Carpenter, Sarah Michelle Gellar, Michelle Trachtenberg, I think Ashley Benson, all
Yes.
people, all women from Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel have come forward to be like Charisma. I'm not saying like, oh, she's trying to like get on the same train. She wove her stuff into the Ray Fisher stuff, being like, I stand with him because of this.
Yeah.
But yeah, they have come forward pretty much for me confirming stuff that I already felt was a thing because of the letter his wife wrote and his response to that letter. I feel like this is kind of just like giving confirmation now, as opposed to being like, whoa, I can't believe this.
Yeah, it's just one of those things of like, here's the theory or the accusation, and then here's the evidence that comes out after that.
Mhm.
And you're like, okay, this is so damning and so like it's so like it's the evidence is very overwhelming.
Yes.
In this regard, and it's one of those things where I'm heavily in conflicted because of course Buffy was a big part of my life, but of course it's one of those things again where
I mean,
you separate
it's his name on it, but he's not the only one who worked on it, so you don't have to feel like, oh, I have to throw away Buffy.
Oh, I don't feel like that at all. I don't feel like that at all whatsoever. I appreciate what it was and all that kind of stuff, but it's not all Joss Whedon that did Buffy. And to give him that is to really undercut the work that everyone else did on that show.
Mm-hmm.
So that's to me, I'm like, yeah, okay, it does suck that I idolized Joss Whedon for such a big part of my life, but I think as with anyone, it's just, hey, when presented with new information, you get to change your opinion and your stance. According to your lifestyles at that time. It's not going back on anything. It's not turning your back. It's just like, hey, I didn't realize that about that person, and that's really shitty. I don't agree with that whatsoever. And I'm not supporting that thing anymore. So
yeah. So that is what we have to say on that matter. I'm going to just keep talking about the movie now.
Yes.
And just know that any praise I give this movie is not like,
it's not
condoning any like behavior that Joss Whedon has exhibited and
Correct.
the trauma he's caused for people. I'm not saying like, yeah, so this movie's good, so Joss Whedon is good. I'm saying if I do like anything about this, it has to do with my feelings towards what was on screen and not towards the person who wrote it and directed it.
I agree, 100%. Because let's be perfectly honest here. Joss Whedon, sure, he's got writing and directing credits here, but let's be perfectly honest here. A big like credit for everything that is MCU is Kevin Feige. So
Kevin Feige is not a writer though. So
no, he's not a writer.
He can quarterback stuff, but I do think that Joss Whedon did have a lot to do with Phase 1.
Yes.
He Marvel. He is the person. He like rewrote stuff on Thor. He did stuff because all of it needed to lead into his movie. So no, I won't downplay his involvement in this and try to be like, it's more Kevin Feige. He was a guy that Kevin Feige leaned on, and we can see the other people that Kevin Feige leans on moving forward, but he was someone that Kevin Feige leaned on to map out everything, not just his movies.
My point of bringing that up was the same kind of logic that I had with Buffy, the idea of Joss Whedon and then like the other people behind him. And in this situation is Kevin Feige. It's all the actors, obviously, the crew, the production, like writing staff, everyone involved with the Avengers. We are specifically, you and I, talking about this movie independent of Joss Whedon, because we do not condone his actions. That's all we're saying as a blanket statement right at the beginning of the podcast, because it needs to be said. It does. Because it's at this point in time, it's hard to separate. Well, it's not hard to separate, but it's just one of those things where his influence, like when we talk about X-Men movies, Brett Ratner's influence is in there too.
Do you mean Bryan Singer?
Sorry, Singer. Yeah, Ratner is just someone else altogether.
He did a movie, but yeah.
Yeah. So it's just, again, one of those other kind of things where this is the person that has done terrible things, made a lot of people's lives a living hell. We're not celebrating that person, but the work is what is on critique right now. That's it. That being said, let's get into it. Avengers.
So I heard another podcast talk about this movie recently, and I think they had the right way of looking at it. I do feel that if you were to look at this and you don't care about like comic book movies, or you've more recently seen stuff like Black Panther, Ragnarok, and Infinity War and Endgame, yeah, this movie probably doesn't feel as good as those movies. But I do think that the context behind it is this is the biggest scale of like intersecting what was ostensibly separate characters and like putting them together, and we can see, and I know that Justice League is different because there's different stuff around that and they cut it to be a certain way, but you can see that it's not just a slam dunk for being like, hey, here are the characters you liked and now we put them together. That's not like a guaranteed win. And Justice League had the director, but also like people who had the knowledge of what worked with Avengers, and they still fumbled it. And we probably will talk about the Snyder Cut. I don't think that's going to work as well either, as a, wow, this is them together for the first time. Look at how well that played. And I think that is my love for the movie, is that like I was invested in mostly just Tony Stark, Iron Man, but I was like, man, like, and then he's gonna have other superheroes he has to deal with, like, not deal with, but like work with. How is that gonna work? Am I gonna feel like they get short shifted or whatever? And I thought it was really well done in terms of melding everybody together and having a team other than Hawkeye. That it does kind of like, he is kind of like, oh yeah, his mind got taken over, and then he comes back for the last.
Hawkeye is definitely a very interesting character that gets the shaft in multiple forms of the more modern versions of Avengers storytelling, which is very, very interesting. But to echo what you're saying, yeah, absolutely. When you rewatching this movie, I always have to put myself in this mindset of like, yeah, it's not Infinity War, but this had to exist to get to Infinity War. Everything that the movie, the testament to how successful this movie is the idea that the amount of financial gamble that Marvel Studios put on this movie was insane. Because you're right, nothing like this had been done previously on
well, I never said nothing. All I said was this is the biggest scale.
Right. So you're right, not nothing. But this had been the biggest Hail Mary of all time, in the sense where if it worked, it would have worked amazingly. And we all know what happened there. And if it didn't, it would have just collapsed everything, because the amount of money they put behind it and all that kind of stuff. And just that when it wasn't only that, but the sheer scale of the concept of what they were doing was just sprinkled out throughout phase one. You get hints and all these kind of things. I remember myself like thinking, watching Iron Man, cool, that was an awesome movie. And then people were like, did you see the end scene? I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? The movie was over. They ran the credits. There's no such thing as an end scene. And that's when they introduced the idea of like the end scene. And then
they didn't, but
no, they didn't. But the idea of the end scene being related to something else and all these kind of things was like, wait, what's going on here? It's like a wealth of Easter eggs, a wealth of like all this kind of information, but you're getting a sense of what's happening. Little pitters of like, oh, we have Hulk, and then wait, did Robert Downey Jr. just show up in this? Like, you have all those kind of moments throughout the whole thing, and then at the end of Captain America, you see confirmation of like Steve Rogers in the modern day society. You get the sense of, oh my God, they're building to something huge. they're doing it, and then once they announced this trailer, that was, to me, game over. I was like, what the hell is happening? I've never seen anything like this.
Well,
This
his trailer is at the end of Captain America.
Yes. So having seen seen that like at the end of Captain America, I wasn't expecting this. I'm still like, okay, this is way too ambitious of a project. Like, money's gonna talk and all this kind of stuff. And the amount of money that was being made at the time from these movies wasn't like the scale of what it's making now. It wasn't. It was making money. It was profitable. People liked the product, but it wasn't doing massive numbers like it's doing now. That box office was insane. That everything about that was just absolute insanity. The story writing, everything. I couldn't do enough about that, but we have to put ourselves in that context of that's. It was to me, this movie represents more of that feeling than it does about objectively, let's look at this movie. And I think there's a little bit of an issue there, and it's hard for me to separate whether or not I'm judging based on nostalgia or judging based on objective criticism now.
Yeah, I think the movie has its like moments where you're kind of like, oh, we're really like spinning our wheels, but I do think that it's really, for a first time watch, realistically, it was like, holy shit, like they're really together, like they're really doing this, it's happening. And they even had the issue of like they had to recast their Hulk, and but like that, I mean, not that I cared about the Hulk, but like I don't feel like the movie suffers because it's a different Hulk. You're just like, yeah, like they actually made this feel good too, because it is like a different energy from the other characters, and so it just feels like natural that this is our Hulk moving forward.
Yeah, and that was, in terms of recastings in an ensemble, for his first exposure to this ensemble, it was a very, very, like, to me, I didn't know whether or not that was going to pay off. I'm like, oh, we have to go with the Edward Norton Hulk here, where we're doing all this kind of stuff. Edward Norton's not attached. I'm like, okay, that's great. Then we got Mark Ruffalo, and then he's doing something completely different than Edward Norton. And I start to think to myself after the film, how did I feel about Hulk? And Hulk was one of those things where I'm like, I loved Mark Ruffalo's interpretation way, way more. But how did I like the idea of essentially they introduced a brand new character in this movie, and we just accepted that? That part is a little
I don't see it as a brand new character, because he references stuff that happened from the first movie, and the first movie is about how he becomes the Mark Ruffalo thing. Like that whole last scene of him in Incredible Hulk opening his eyes but smiling is the whole I'm angry all the time thing. It's you're seeing him shift into Mark Ruffalo. So I think we talked about that when we did Incredible Hulk. So I don't see it as two different characters. It's what I was saying. It's that it feels like a natural progression. I don't like, it doesn't feel like you're starting again if you are paying attention. I think, yeah, there's the obvious, like if you're just a casual fan and you're like, oh, it's a new guy, again, you're a casual fan, so I don't think it matters that much to you anyway. You're just like, oh, that's not Edward Norton, whatever. But it also works if you were like genuinely tracking the Hulk storyline, which is he's the angry guy, angry nervous guy in Incredible Hulk, and then he's the guy who's way more in control of what he's doing, but still kind of angry about the situation. And then you end with Endgame, where he's like, oh yeah, I realize how to just merge everything. But I do feel like Incredible Hulk plants all those seeds.
Yeah. Well, that's fair enough. I mean, the Incredible Hulk, it is what it is. But I do like Mark Ruffalo in this significantly more. I think everyone universally praises that. I don't think that's much of a consideration or a concern there. It was just like, to me, that was a move that could have been a disaster for what it would have been, but it worked out so well. And that's like the thing that gets me sold right off the bat. I'm like, oh my God, I'm way more, like within the first scene, I'm like, I'm so much more down with this Hulk. And the idea of like, that Natasha interrogation with the Hulk, where it's like, sorry, I just wanted to do that just to see what you would do. Let's put it down. And like that level of Hulk, I'm like, this is perfect, because he's a guy that's like, no, I've accepted this. There's he putting himself in a chaotic area like India, and I'm like, this is a wonderful, wonderful way of going off that Brazil kind of connection that he had in the first one to this, to be like, no, he definitely does this to really put himself in control, and it's actually a wonderful thing. So you're right about that progression. It's just, I'm just happy to see Norton go in that regard.
Yeah. I mean, the other big thing is I felt like this movie used Hulk the best way possible as like, and I mean the Hulk, not Bruce Banner.
Right.
It is Bruce. Yeah, Bruce. He is just this force of nature that like can tear through stuff. And you don't have to try, and like I liked kind of knowing like, oh, we're not doing another Hulk movie. I was like, yeah, it just works better if he shows up in other people's things. That's for me, because I don't really care about I actively don't like the character, but like I thought this movie used him really well, and he's been used well moving forward. Probably not that great in Age of Ultron, but I think basically every other time I've seen him since Avengers, I've been like, yeah, that was a good use of the Hulk or that character.
Yeah, I agree. I just find the Hulk to be a very difficult character to write from a movie standpoint, because it's just like, no matter what, within that allotted amount of time, the point of the Hulk is that he's misunderstood and all that kind of stuff, and that he reacts and like he loses control and all that kind of stuff. There's only so much storytelling you can do with that. I do like what they're doing, what they end up doing with Hulk, where they progress him into Professor Hulk and all those kind of things. But I mean, despite what the fan base says about him being weak or whatever, but I do like those progressions of the idea, the philosophical idea of like him putting those two minds together. They're not at war anymore. They're together. I love that philosophical idea, but that's not the movie we're talking about right now. This Hulk, I agree, and how they use him going forward from this movie is way better, because I just don't think that there's a good Hulk story that can be told within the confines of what's already been established already. In the sense where the best Hulk stories out there involve a ton of other really, really interesting characters, and that's why we get Planet Hulk, a mini version of Planet Hulk in Ragnarok. These are the best uses of Hulk, because I've read a lot of Hulk stories solo, and I'm just like, I don't get it. I really don't. It's a fun character, but it's not a character that I want to lead anything from a telling standpoint. Because it's always him trying to find a cure or just reacting or whatever it is, or a combination of all three of those things. But yeah,
that's the Hulk section.
That is the Hulk section.
I guess next is Black Widow, because I feel like this is the first movie where I feel like they're starting to actually get what's good about her. We talked a lot about Iron Man 2 and how it's just like she's got her fight scenes, but otherwise it's a really weird sexualization of her that doesn't pay off realistically. This movie still has the sexualization of her, like the first time you see her, the way she's dressed. But I just love that turn. I still think it's a really good turn where she's like, yeah, I'm interrogating this guy, and the guy's like, wait, no, I'm torturing you. She's like, yeah, he's giving me all the information. Like, I love that, like her ability to like flip things on people. Like that is good. I mean, yes, she can also kick people's asses. That's good, but I like how her brain works. And like you even get like those moments where she's like, yeah, love is for kids. I like, that's not what I'm here for. I'm here to clear a ledger and stuff. And it gives you a place to go from there. Like she's not just like this sexy woman you don't know. It's like, oh, okay, that's her thing. She was doing things that are probably considered bad, and now like she's part of this team because she needs to like absolve herself of all that. And then so then you can have moments in Endgame where you're like, oh, this was her family, like this is her happy place, she's fighting for this, like this is what she cares about. But to start in Avengers, yeah, it's nice to be like, oh yeah, like I don't care really, I just need to like feel like I'm doing something to counteract all the bad things I did before.
Sure. Yeah. I absolutely agree with you. This is the first movie where I'm like, this is where we actually meet Black Widow. Iron Man 2, we don't meet Black Widow. We meet the persona, the avatar of who she's put on to deceive Tony Stark. That's who we meet more than anything else. And then when we actually meet Black Widow, because that shift is such a weird one, because they're like, okay, Black Widow is a sexy fighter. And it's just like, but that's weird. Like, what? That's not
yeah,
where
it's
her
not all
personality
of that's not all she is.
Yeah, like I love the fact that in this in that interrogation scene, fantastic. She's very gorgeous, obviously, and she uses that to her advantage. I'm like, yes, that's awesome. Please do that more.
Well, I don't know if she's using her looks so much as she knows that as a woman, they think they're in control of that situation. So I feel like she is using her mind more than her looks in this movie.
Right, but I think she plays up. She's definitely using her mind, but more than her looks. I'm not disagreeing with that. But the way she uses her looks in this too is extremely effective. Whether or not that's her being like, I'm going to do this because this person has a thing for redheads, or I'm doing this because it's easier for them to if male psychology or whatever, thinking mansplaining their whole like thing or whatever it is, it's still an effective use of what she does there in that interrogation scene, because she's never dressed like that the rest of the movie in any other kind of way. She's just like in uniform. I'm like, great, this is Black Widow, awesome. And it's such a great interrogation. The idea of like, even the idea she just makes fun of him with Coulson in front of him. It's like, this, come on, I'm in the middle of interrogation. You gotta be kidding me, right? This idiot's giving me everything. And then he's like, what, me? And then he's like, yeah, you are. You're giving me everything. It's like the funniest thing in the world. I love it. And how Coulson's like, okay, I'll go on hold while she's kicking their asses. It's the best. It's so good. I'm like, this is what I love about Natasha Romanoff. It's really, really fantastic.
Yeah, I like that. I like her moment with Loki where she's like pretending. That's why I don't know if it's looks. I think she's constantly aware of how men see women, because it's the same thing. They underestimate what she's doing in that moment. I don't know why she's dressed like that, but my assumption is she was at a party and she just needed to fit in. And then she lured him out. And with the Loki thing, she's doing the same thing. She starts crying, which isn't playing on your looks. That's more playing on your feminine, just the fact that you are a woman. And then he starts letting loose all of his plan to her. And she's like, oh, that's your plan. Thank you. Goodbye.
Yeah. It's a very interesting thing to me. I will say this because I work in a predominantly female dominated industry of nutritionists, dietitians, all that kind of stuff. It's primarily female. The statistics are 95%. And I have definitely been in professional development practices in classes where they have definitely talked about using your appearance in a negotiation setting.
Yeah.
And it's a highly fascinating thing. And I'm like, I have the mentality behind that. It's obviously, as a man, I don't know what that is, but that, like, getting a glimpse into that world,
like, to accentuate your femininity. Or
exactly.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. It is reminding someone you're a woman more than it is like, I'm the hot one. It's more like that, because the same thing goes for men. Like, there is, like, when you get interview tips, you are supposed to be exuding, if you're a man, masculinity, if you're a woman, femininity. Like, that is, I don't like it, but that is, so you're right. But I think that I see that as more gender roles.
Yeah, it's like, how do you play your gender roles to your advantage? How do you play archetypes to your advantage and all that kind of stuff? And Black Widow does it very, very well. It's even it being so incredibly famous. My guess in that scene was, oh yeah, they were at a dinner party, like all this kind of stuff. She got caught. She planned to get caught, obviously, and that's where it is. I'm like, the outfit makes perfect sense to me. Either that or this guy hired an escort, and Black Widow shows up, and then they did that. Like, there's many ways you can look at it, because it's that's what Black Widow would do. She would just be like, no, we're getting the information from you and all this kind of stuff. It's fantastic. Great opening scene. Throughout the whole movie, Black Widow is so strong, because to me, it's very clear that she's the one holding this group together before Steve Rogers can, in the sense where she's like, no, we're fighting for one of our own. She keeps advocating for Clinton, all that kind of stuff. And when Clint comes out of it, that scene that they share together I really do like that scene, because it shows that, like, that love for one and adoration for one another without being sexualized. And I think that's such a healthy thing to show on screen, because it's one of those things where it's just like, I never want love stories just because there's a male character and a female character. I hate that. But this is one of those things where it's like, no, they love each other, but it's like, this is not a sexualized love. It's not a romantic love. It's wonderful to see that on screen.
Yeah. I mean, it works on a lot of levels. They're the two humans, so they already feel more bonded, but they are the only two that have worked with any significant amount of time together.
Correct.
So yeah, and and Loki even tries to say, "Oh, do you love him?" And she's like, "No, like I just like him. Like I like him, but I'm not here to be like, oh, I'm in love with this guy." And then obviously, Age of Ultron changes that, but not for her and
not for her. Yeah.
But it does change it for her and Hulk.
Right.
So yeah, but again, I still see that as like progression of the character, like making her more human, because this movie isn't about, because I don't agree that she's holding the team together. I think she's got a job to do, and that's what she's focused on, because even in the point where it's like, oh, you have to go talk to the big guy, she's like, I don't want to do that. I'm doing my own thing right now. So I don't really agree that she's like doing, like, she's not trying to keep a team together. I think she's just, as I said, this movie is very like a personal thing for her of like, I need to like feel better myself. And then she'll start to grow to be like, oh, like I think it's Winter Soldier where you see her being like, oh, like I can have friends. I can like actually see these people as more than just co-workers that get the job done with me.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. That is true. And I'm thinking you're thinking of that scene before they fight George St. Pierre on that ship, where they're just like, what about this person from accounting? Why don't you date her? Like that.
I'm thinking more about after they kiss, and it's more like, she's not playing it like, oh, like maybe I have feelings for you. It's just like, yeah, like we're friends. Like just talk to me like a friend. Like I feel like we're. And she even says, maybe you're in the wrong business if you are looking for friends. But I feel like that's her talking to herself more than Steve. But we'll get to that movie. So I think that this movie is a good jumping off point for Black Widow. I think you get a sense of what she cares about in this movie, but that doesn't mean that she's only ever going to care about things that way moving forward. It's just a nice place, like an entry point for her.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about this movie for Black Widow is the idea of, you're absolutely right. This is the first time you actually see her motivations, because in Iron Man 2, she's just a shield agent, right? She's just like doing her job. You see just how she does her job and how effective she is at it, but you essentially see her doing her job. This one is like, I have a job to do, but I have a personal stake in this. And that's when you start to care about the character, because you're like, oh, okay, you're not just this hardened spy. You actually do have things, but you're hardened through your training, the Red Sparrow projects, and all this kind of stuff, which makes perfect sense. But we don't know. We know that as giant devoted comic book fans, but the audience doesn't know that. And we also, as an audience, don't know whether or not Marvel's going to introduce that storyline into the backstory of this character, right? There's a lot of things that they don't write into this character, like the Tony Stark alcoholism, demon in the bottle stuff. They'll lightly graze over, but like more use his partying ways with alcohol to play up the playboy thing, but also the idea of like, oh, it's not a problem, it's just him doing this. I'm like, no, the demon in the bottle storyline is dark, it's deep, and it's just like, well, they wouldn't do that. So we didn't know what Marvel was willing to commit to in these backstories of these characters, because some of them gets really, really dark, right? So
with the Iron Man 2 thing, though, we already talked about it in the episode. I do still think they went dark. He was being suicidal. He was doing things to see like if he still cared to live. Yeah, because he saw the like ticking clock. So yes, you could argue that they didn't commit to alcohol, but they still committed to going there with his character.
I agree.
I guess we can talk about Hawkeye. My sense was we were going to talk about all six, but I realized we were like halfway through this and we'd only talked about two of them. But yeah, Clint, what a guy. You don't really know much about him in this, which is why I'm assuming they did what they did in Age of Ultron for him. But yeah, he's just kind of like that guy that maybe you remember from Thor. I think it helps that he's like introduced by Selvig, who was in Thor, and you're like, oh yeah, maybe I remember him. And he does his zip down thing, but then he immediately gets taken over, and you're kind of just like, all right. And I mean, that is kind of his trajectory, is that in the comics he was a bad guy that they won over, but he didn't start a bad guy. He just kind of gets brainwashed. So you're like, I still don't know like him. You're just like, oh, it's the brainwashed Archer. And then I will say I did kind of like at the end of the movie when Thor was like, yeah, I need to get at Loki. And he's like, yeah, get in line. I need to get back at him for this. I was like, yeah, that's good. That's some character beat.
Yeah, Hawkeye in this movie gets the shaft for sure. That's not a Archer joke, but it would be. Anyway, he does get the shaft. Taking over mind control. You don't know the character. We still don't know about the character by the end of the movie. We just know that Natasha and Clint have a good relationship. So that's it. Other than that, like, there's not much to say about this character. I just feel like this character, in the grand scheme of things, is always going to be that a character that we're going to joke about. The idea of like,
I still maintain I loved him in Civil War. Like everything about how he was used in that, I was like, this is great.
Yeah,
he comes back. He's like, I've got a plan. This plan will work. Let's go. Yep. He even has the joke about like, oh, why didn't you just retire and play golf? He's like, I don't know. I played 18. I shot 18. It's not that fun to me. Like, I was like, yeah, this is some good ass Hawkeye.
Yeah,
like, he's funny, but competent.
Yeah,
he's not goofy. He's just like, yeah, this is. And I even like when he gets mad at Tony later on the raft. Like, that was really good. Everything about him in Civil War is great. I basically just don't care about him in any other movie he's in.
Yeah, in this movie, he's just doesn't have a lot to do. It's not a good Hawkeye movie to get to know this version of Hawkeye.
Yeah, and I think like WandaVision, his show will make. I know the show is him passing the mantle, but I think that will be the most I've liked him is his show.
I would agree. I'm looking forward to the Kate Bishop Hawkeye series. That'll be good.
Yeah. So that's Hawkeye. Great. Thor. He's only there because of Loki.
I will say though, rewatching this movie makes me reappreciate the first Thor a little bit more in how they specifically wrote it from this perspective of like the natural progression of the story beats in Thor are in here too. And I'm like, that was something that I'm like, I never really appreciated that in the past. Now I'm like, okay, the idea of like Loki's trying to prove himself. He's more desperate. It's going along that storyline for him and his arc of proving himself. And like, I once was king. I'm trying to get back to that glory and that desperation he does to strike a deal.
Was he like, you say that, but it doesn't connect for me. He kept saying I was the rightful king. I'm like, no, unless he's talking about being an ice giant.
Well,
I don't think he was ever. That was the point of the movie. Is he realized, I was never in line to be the king.
Right.
That was the point of the first movie, and then this movie. I'm like, what? Who is he proving this to? He's just angry and like being spiteful. That's what Thor says. Like, oh, you're just like doing this because I like this planet.
Yeah, you're just
like, okay, that's fair. Like, fair enough, but I don't feel like it's like that. Like. Yeah, like someone also said this is the least they've liked Loki. I'm like, yeah, it might be the least I've liked Loki as a character. I'm not saying like, oh, as a good. I mean, like, it's the least complex he's ever been. It's the least like there's like nothing to dig into. Just like they've kind of tied it up in one line. Like, you're doing this because this is the Earth this is the planet I like.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. His writing in this, his motivations are very, very straightforward. There's nothing muddying it. I don't think this movie is interested in doing that. I think Thor Dark World is more interested in exploring Loki's other side, his emotional side, than anything else. But this movie is definitely the idea of like, I think what it does do is like, okay, like for the weakness of how weak the movie Thor is in relative to the first slate. It certainly does strengthen the first movie of being like, I can see why Loki would get to this point. And then even at the end, that when he gets at the tower where he's like, it's too late, I can't stop this, I can't do all this kind of stuff. It's him admitting like, listen, yeah, I'm just a cog in this right now. And like all of it is just,
but really, that's why I'm saying it's not a good, it doesn't make the first movie stronger, because it's like, yeah, it's the least interesting as in terms of character to unwrap, but even as you say that, like, it's him admitting defeat, which he's never done before and never will do again. Like, it's weird. It doesn't. I don't understand the connection between like the determination you see in Thor versus him admitting like, oh yeah, I guess I got in over my head.
Right.
Like it seems like, and as I said, the things he keeps saying in this movie, I'm like, did I miss something? Like it doesn't feel connected. I'm like, you weren't ever rightfully king. You weren't ever in line to be king. And when we rewatch Thor, I'm like, that is interesting because then the movie is actually showing him learning like the hypocrisy of his father. Well, yeah, whatever, we'll call him father of Odin, and actually holding Odin to task. And then all of that gets stripped away. He's like, all right, I get to be like, people will like me if I do this.
Right. So I here's how because you know how like villains always have a weird justification to how they can spin stories to make themselves heroes, in the sense where arguably, yes, he was rightful king because when Odin went into the Odin sleep, still whether or not he put him in there, still went into the Odin sleep, Thor was already banished. Therefore, yes, he was the rightful ruler, but because he manipulated things behind the scene.
But that's like for a second. The way he says it in this movie, you would have to assume that this was something he thought was always going to be the case.
Well,
but
he did.
They show you in the first movie, basically from the first scene of them as kids, is him recognizing, oh, he's just going to give it to Thor.
Right. So I get that. But the idea of him being like, okay, now I'm going to take back what's rightfully mine. I was lied to my whole life that I was in line in consideration for the throne, whatever that might be. And that was important to him. And now he's like, I'm going to take the throne. I'm going to take the power. I'm going to take what's rightfully mine. I'm like, that all tracks to me. That all makes sense. It's very simplistic. I will tell you that. Yes, I will agree. 100%. It's very simplistic because at the end of the line, it's just desperation. It's the idea of like, you've been publicly embarrassed right now. You want power. You want to prove yourself. You want to do all these things. You want to be a big player. Here's something that you can do, not realizing he's an instrument for someone else. And then to that point where he just like full on lives into that role, it's just like, you're right. It's kind of like inconsistencies, but you can see the desperation of his character, of what he's doing at that point in time. And that was what was interesting to me.
I mean, I see how you've read into it. I don't think that it's played as desperation. I think that it is played as just villain of the week. Like, oh, I'm just a villain now, which always hasn't really tracked for me.
Yeah. In all fairness, that is a very Whedon thing. He's already like, it is a very Buffy thing for him to do. That he's always like, it's the villain of the week. And he even says that in a couple of like Buffy episodes. So like the idea of him using Loki in that regard, to me, tracks completely because.
Yeah, well, no, I get how the movie kind of like when we talk about Dark Knight Rises, I get how they've like been able to bend things so that it's comic accurate in certain ways, like the way they made Hawkeye a bad guy before he joined the team, or the way this whole movie is Loki turning the Hulk against the Avengers, and that's what brings them together. Like I see how they did all that, but what I'm saying is that only works in a vacuum in this movie for the Loki stuff. I don't think it works if you're connecting it to the other stuff.
Right, but and that is fair. Like I think the only connection that it makes from a Loki standpoint is how that works from Thor and this Loki and all that kind of stuff. Like that's how I see it. His character arcs through this movie, and then Dark World is him like, no, I've been defeated. This is me coping, dealing with it, all this kind of stuff, and then now really getting broken down because the one person that I loved and the one person that loved me back, his mom, is gone, and I'm just like, that is where I like Loki a lot because of his complexities of that. He's like, yeah, you did this, but it's just like at the end of the day, I don't know. I do have some sort of connection or like some sort of empathy or whatever with the character, in the sense where it's just like, yeah, it's kind of bullshit that you were raised this and then lied to and then all this kind of stuff, and then you're treated this way and all this like that. I get why that would be really, really upsetting to someone. And then to have that level of insult towards Loki turn into something like this was very interesting for me to see. It was very interesting because it was just like, okay, one thing now, because it was, to be perfectly honest, a less successful version of what Thanos is trying to do, right? Thanos is trying to be like, oh, I'm trying to take over the world, all this kind of stuff for his reasons. Loki, we know, is when he rules things, all he wants to do is just whatever, we're just having fun. We're watching plays, we're eating grapes and stuff like that. Like that's what Loki wants to do. He just wants to be hedonistic. That's
This
it.
is what I'm saying. That's why it doesn't feel connected, because
Right.
why would you spend all your time doing this shit on Earth if what you want to do is deal with Asgard?
Yeah,
and I get that it's like, oh, he needs to do that and then he can rule, but it's like, I just think it works better if you just look at this in a vacuum. And I understand, yeah, he went from disillusioned, and so then it makes sense the next time you see him, he's the most villainous. It just seems like he is just all villain instead of any kind of nuance, and then you get to move back into nuanced.
Yep, the little bit of nuance that's sprinkled out throughout this is not great, but it is, to me, like, I like the progression of that character arc a lot more. Like over Thor, Avengers, and Dark World, I think his progression, like the character of Loki's progression, is very interesting. Because I always like villains more, and Loki is always riding that line, and it's fun. It's a fun character for me. I think switching gears to, I guess,
Steve, the guy. I really like how many times he gets made fun of.
Yeah.
But what I liked about this performance is, like, it's the angriest you've seen him. Like, he's really pissed off most of the time. Not really like, yeah, he has his, oh, I get that reference moments, but most of the fact is just like when he first talks to Nick Fury and he's like, yeah, like, okay, we won the war, but what the fuck? Like, this is what we have now? This is ridiculous.
Yeah, and you know what? And that's a very interesting ideology of, like, someone that won World War II.
Well, he didn't get to see the win.
And then
he said specifically, they told me we won.
Yeah, they said we won. They said this was like, what the hell? This came out of it? It's a very interesting idea. And he's like, I'm mad at this because it's like, is this better? Is this worse? I don't know. And all this kind of stuff, right? Especially when we get to the second movie for him. It's Winter Soldier. I mean, no, sorry, Civil War. That's when it gets really, really good for it. His character arc is just fantastic throughout the whole MCU. So it's Steve Rogers in this, I really, really like, because it's the idea of, like, you can see how he's like, no, I'm still instilling my ideals from that era into this one.
Yeah, like, oh God, there's only one God, ma'am, and I'm sure he doesn't dress like that. Like, stuff like that.
You can see.
I'm glad that that's still there.
Yeah, you can see him struggling to be, a part of this and all this kind of stuff. The way he talks to, Tony Stark is just like, you're a big man. I know a ton of guys like you, like, obviously referring to soldiers and all this kind of stuff, not realizing, hey, this is a world that has not been at war the way you're still stuck in war. You know what I mean? It's a crazy.
Well, they don't do war the way he did. The big difference being, like, Nazis. That's a very easy thing to be like, there was good guys and bad guys.
Yes.
Always still gray areas, but Nazis is not a gray area.
It's not a gray area.
So yes, they are still at war the way America, but it's not the same type of war. So this is more like him having to be like, oh, you can't just be like good and bad. Which is kind of, it is how he looks at the world in terms of bullies versus non-bullies. That's what he says. I heard someone say they didn't like that he said that he should be more specific, but I'm like, no, saying bullies means that he isn't like, oh, Nazis are bullies. It means he can be like, oh, SHIELD is a bully. Like, they're a bully. They shouldn't be able to be doing what they're doing. Like, I like that he left it open-ended like that. Like, no, I don't like bullies. And so he's angry this movie because, like, wait, am I working with the bullies? Like, is that what's happening? Like, when he's like, oh, that's like Hydra Tech, and Nick Fury's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And then he's like, oh, you are working on Hydra Tech. Like, what the fuck? Yeah,
everything, like. And even when, like, the thing I like a lot about Steve is when his naivety is on display here. The best example. It's just like, we're a government agency. The government agency is going to do the best. It's like, I'm a soldier, follow orders, all this kind of stuff. He instills that into all the other Avengers. Like, this is what I do. He was like, oh, Tony, you're a big man. Like, take that away. You're not the guy to put your life on the line for the other guy and all this kind of stuff. He does all those things because that's his ideal. He's instilling that into the whole team.
He's not instilling it, because there's a very important part later where
Fair enough. He's not in
Iron
stone.
Man pushes back and he's like, "We are not soldiers."
Right.
When he
So-
said, "Oh, Coulson was a good soldier," and he's like, "We're not soldiers."
Right.
I think that's important.
That is important. You're right. So he's still stuck in that. He's still trying to like understand the world as if it's through the lens of war, right?
Mhm.
Which makes a lot of sense for his character. And this movie for him coming out of that is a very interesting movie altogether because it's like, okay, this is what I'm familiar with. I like that part where he's like, this might be so weird for you while they're on the hell carrier.
Mhm.
It's like, nope, this is the part that is actually familiar to me. War is the exact same kind of deal.
Well,
And
that's
it's,
yeah.
Yeah.
I like that the movies, not just this one or anyone, is about him thinking for himself. Like that's why the end game ending is good. It's like, you know what? Yeah, like I spent my whole life in service to something. I think I will get that life that everyone has kept talking about. So yeah, I will chill out with Peggy.
and even with Civil War, the idea of like his character being like, yeah, I'm following orders here. I'm like, this is what I'm supposed to do, and him reinforcing that narrative towards Civil War as well as
Well,
where
no,
he's like,
he's doing the opposite in Civil War. He's saying, "No, I don't want to be told what to do."
no, that's what I mean. His progression
Yeah.
of here's where this character starts, and then through the things that happen through him to the MCU, he becomes a character that's like, no, there's bullies despite which team I'm on.
Mhm.
And we need to be able to call that out. And I'm like, that is the Captain America I want to see. That's
Yeah.
what I want to do because that stands for what Captain America what stood for at the time of his inception. The idea of like fighting, well, at that time, Nazi is very, very clear, plain cut because it was the imagery of Captain America was to make fun of Hitler too, the Aryan race and all that kind of stuff. It's like, yeah, you're fighting your own enemy. This is your ideal. You're fighting it.
Mhm.
Kind of. So I loved every aspect of that. But how to make Captain America relevant in this day and age was and always would have been the biggest issue for the MCU, and they do it so successfully here because
Yeah.
they're just like, no, that he's working through this stuff on screen while there's conflict throughout the rest of the team, so to speak. You know, it's a very interesting way of doing it.
Well, yeah, they're not quite the team yet until the end of the movie.
Oh,
That's where
absolutely.
they become. But yeah, I like this version of him of like being angry, kind of like, why'd you even wake me up? Or like when he's like, can you tell us about the Tesseract? Like, yeah, you should have left it at the bottom of the ocean. Like,
Yep.
What the hell are we doing here? Yeah, I really like him in this. Yeah, let's move on to Iron Man. I still feel like what a great time. I am so happy that they got Robert Downey Jr. This is the perfect, like I feel like he's the last one they introduce. You see him last out of all the Avengers. No, maybe you see Thor last. You definitely see Thor last.
Yeah, you see Thor last. He comes in last again, Loki. And then
Yeah, but it was like I remember watching this. I'm like, wow, like they still haven't cut to Tony yet. Wow, all right. Like when are we gonna get some Tony? And I don't say that to be like the movie only gets started when Tony's there. It's just like, wow, they trusted they had something good because they didn't just hit you over the head with Tony right away, which would have been at least the character you had the most time to like stew with by that point.
Yeah.
The
Tony entrance in here is fantastic. It's so on brand with his character and everything like that. It's really, really great. And the idea that he's just like, hey, I know who Steve Rogers is. My dad talked about this guy. That first time where they're just like stand next to each other, Captain, Mr. Stark, Captain. That was wonderful to me. I loved it. It was really, really good. There's so much about Tony's character in this that I really, really, really enjoy. From the perspective of when even Tony says this himself, he brings up the HR report, or not the HR report, the personality assessment report that Field does on him. He's like, I thought I did this, I thought I did this, I thought I did this. You wanted Iron Man, you didn't want Tony Stark, all this kind of stuff. Why are you doing this now? And then they're like, well, it's not about personality reports anymore. We need this. And then the idea of that personality report being so incredibly accurate in how he's like behaving around everyone else. He's like, yeah, he's volatile, he's confrontational. I forget it doesn't play well with others. He does all those things. He's constantly just picking at every other member with his jokes, and I think it's so funny.
But that's why I like that he became friends with Bruce. Like he is literally poking him to see if he, but it's still a like he's like, why are you tiptoeing? You should be like strutting. Like, why are you like this? Like, stop hiding stuff. Like, you're amazing. So just let it loose. But then Captain America's like, you're endangering everybody. Stop that. But they do talk, like they speak the same language, and I like that.
Yeah.
He's like, now finally someone's speaking English, and Cap's like, is that what just happened?
The funniest thing about that was just like the way he's like, was I the only one that did the readings? I'm like, oh my god, that's such a funny thing to say. Because I'm like, oh yeah, because I was in university at the time, and I think we both were, and I was like,
not.
No.
Was
this after or before?
This is 2012. I graduated in 2008.
Oh yeah, it must have been afterward. I can't remember for life. I still think the 90s is 5 years ago. Anyways, so the way he is in this is just so damn funny. The idea of like even Agent Coulson showing, I was like, no, excuse me, his first name is Agent, and everything about him is great. And I love how Pepper Potts is like the Avengers Initiative, which I know nothing about. It was such a funny thing, so funny.
I like Pepper in this movie. She's got some. It's a nice way of like keeping that world open.
Yes.
But yeah, I think the two Tony things I appreciate are him pushing back against "we're not soldiers," because I think that's an important thing to put into place of like,
yes,
where they differ, but also that like you shouldn't just be a soldier. This is, you can't be a superhero if you're just going to be a soldier. And I think that helps open Steve up, because he realizes, oh, this is something he's right about. Like,
and I love that conflict between the both of them constantly, because their arcs constantly between the both of them is so fantastic. Like, and here's the thing: Tony sacrificing himself at the end of Endgame, and the sacrifice he makes here too with the warhead and the nuclear warhead. It tracks. It's so wonderful.
Well, this is what I was going to say. Everyone kept being like, oh, he finally proved Cap wrong. Like, he did it in the first Avengers. That was him putting his body on the line. Like, there was no guarantee he was coming back from that.
Yeah, I say that to people all the time. I'm like, he did that in Avengers 1. What the hell are you talking about? He can do this. It's just that, they built it up again. Don't get me wrong,
but like it wasn't like he finally did it. He did it again. It's not a one-time trick.
Yeah, he's capable of doing this thing. It's just like, and I love it so much more. It's just like I think the best way to describe Tony is that interaction between him and Cap, where it's like, you're not the guy that would like put your life on the line, put your on the wire so the other guy can walk on top of you. And then Tony just goes like, I think I would be the one that just cuts the wire. And I'm like, that's the best thing of things, is like, why would you sacrifice yourself if you could do something better like this? And it's so smart how his interactions with Steve just like change fundamentally their characters, to the point where we wouldn't get a good Civil War movie if that didn't happen. If those dynamics between the both of them aren't changing each other fundamentally, right? Like, here, Tony makes the sacrifice. It's fantastic. Shuts Steve up right away. It's great. And Steve, just throughout everything, just learns to be a bit more critical. And by the time he gets to identify stuff,
I think it's also human, because we also talk about his love for Bucky that will stop him in his tracks. Like that all of the like doing the right thing will go out the window as soon as you bring up Bucky. And I think that's like the precursor to like, there's a more healthy version of that, which is pursuing a happier life with someone like Peggy. And I'm not saying, oh, it's good because of the heteronormative, you got a wife, now it's happy. It's more like that was something you denied yourself, the same way you almost denied yourself with Bucky. And like, there's ways to do that in life. Like, you can have that. And I think that's what's important, is that's what Steve learns from Tony, is like, no, you're not a soldier anymore, and there's more to life. Like, even him like, I know we're not even talking about this movie anymore, but like him seeing Tony with a wife and kids, and like being like, oh, I guess like there is just like, you can't, and they say it in Age of Ultron as well, like, you just can't always be at war.
Can't do it. And it's seeing him struggle in this movie, Steve Rogers. And his character progressions off screen from movie to movie is just absolutely fantastic.
But yeah, I still didn't really get the confusion. Not confusion. I feel like it was just weird to be like at the end of Iron Man to be like, you're not a part of the Avengers. We only want Tony Stark, and then for this movie to have to like jump through the hoops of like, no, we still need Iron Man. I'm like, why not? Like, I don't. That is, I think, something that's like we're slowing down now. Like,
yeah, at the end of 2, it was the opposite. They wanted Iron Man. They didn't want Tony Stark.
That was definitely not it. They said you can be a consultant, so Tony Stark can consult. We don't want Iron Man.
I thought they wanted. I thought it was the other way around. I thought they wanted Iron Man.
That's why when he comes, he's like, consulting hours are between this and this.
I did like that joke. It's like,
so yeah, they did not want Iron Man because of the team player aspect. They're like, you can consult, which why would he need to be an Iron Man outfit if he's consulting?
Right.
So yeah, it's the opposite. They wanted Tony Stark as a consultant. They did not want Iron Man, and I'm like, what? Why are we doing this?
Like the justifications for the reason why, like on paper, you're like, yeah, this.
No, but I'm saying,
makes sense.
Based on what we know about the MCU, why would you put that weird shit in there?
I mean, arguably, a lot of Iron Man 2 is just weird shit, but it wasn't as bad as it was like this watch through for sure. But I think it gets shit on a lot more than it deserves. But it's just like fumble the ball or whatever it was. You're right, it is a weird thing for sure. For them to be like, this is this, and then immediately go like, no, we want this.
It's an unneeded step.
Yeah, I think it was just one of those things where you're right, absolutely unneeded. But I don't know whether they thought they were just, we're gonna build the tension of like, this is how desperate I've gotten. Even like Nick Fury says that, he's like, you've made me a very, very desperate man, and all this kind of stuff. And to me, that tracks. I think it does take away from it and all this kind of stuff. I don't think it adds to like, oh, this is how desperate we are. We absolutely need.
Yeah, because you don't get that in the movie. You get like all you need is that beginning scene where they get fucked up by Loki, and it's like, yeah, I guess we're at war now. Like, we need to bring in the big guns.
Yep, that's it.
And the fact that no one else wanted him to bring in the Avengers, like when he goes against the Council, like that's all. Like you don't need the setup in Iron Man 2.
Yeah, it's true. You don't. I mean, a lot of Iron Man 2 was what it was.
Yeah, I don't hate Iron Man 2 the way other people do. I think it's fine. I just think that is a beat that's weird considering where they go from there.
Right, and that's fair.
But yeah, I don't really have anything else to say about Iron Man. Tony Stark, I thought he was great in this. It's very fun. And Nick Fury, I always feel like Winter Soldier is the most they use him, but he is used in this a lot.
Yes.
And there is mysteries about that I feel like they never fully unearth, but like the way he reacts to, oh no, I don't know what you're talking about the weapons. And it's mostly just dialogue from Tony Stark being like, oh, like his secrets have secrets and they're working on intelligence, but they don't want to work with me. That's stupid. Like, why would you keep me out of that? So yeah, it's not really stuff that Samuel Jackson gets to play. It's just stuff that's implanted in the audience's head of like what's going on here. And I feel like I don't feel like I ever really get it. Like, did he know that Hydra was infiltrating? Like, I get this, since he's like, I can't trust everybody, but like, I didn't know like what he knew, and I don't feel there's any movie that properly explains it. Maybe it does in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which I did watch, and I still don't know if I remember
how he comes back. Yeah,
how he comes back. No, I mean like how he felt about the whole Hydra took over thing.
Yeah, it's, oh god, I don't know. I just don't think about S.H.I.E.L.D. very much. I mean, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I don't.
Yeah, there's no need.
I mean, the biggest thing about that show was like, we were promised, we'd get actors crossing over, and there was like Lady Sif and like Fury in the first episode, but that was about it. And then it's just like everything they do is independent of everything that, like, there's no crossover or attempt again. But that's why I guess Kevin Feige has taken over the TV stuff too, because he wants.
Yes, he has. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's a fun movie that has a lot of nostalgia in terms of like, well, that's great that they were able to pull that off. I was even thinking, to not bash DC, of how whack I thought the Defenders was. And I'm like, that's the same place. I know we learned later it's not the same people working on it, but I'm like, that's Marvel. Like, they already knew what kind of standard you have to like bring people together, and they still fumbled that one.
Yep. It's true.
So it is not, that is not like, oh, Marvel just knows how to do it. I mean, what I meant to say is Avengers did it really well, and we haven't had a lot of, I don't think we've seen anyone else be able to recreate it, like bringing people together for the first time.
Yeah. Not to
crossover event like that.
Yeah. Not on the big silver screen. I mean, there's arguably, no, I can't.
I do think that the Arrowverse has some fun crossovers.
It does, but that was arguably way after this, right? Because I can't remember
No, I'm not trying to set a precedent. What I'm saying is they did it, and then we haven't seen a lot of people be able to do it again. Like, no one's been able to like recreate that, other than I think the Arrowverse has had some very fun crossovers.
I agree. The Arrowverse crossover events are really, really truly phenomenal. They're a lot of fun. In how they're written and how they're done and all that kind of stuff. And it's just like, yeah, this Legends episode is definitely using the Flash characters and all this kind of stuff, but it's primarily led by the Legends. It's a really, really interesting and fun way of how they've written the whole thing together. I would highly recommend those people check it out, because at this point in time, before the WandaVision stuff and all that kind of stuff, to me, it was DC television was superior to Marvel television, and Marvel.
Oh, right. Well, especially when they had like Ezra Miller on the thing, where you're like, oh fuck, like they did it.
Yeah, it's like, whoa, this is like we're recognizing each world. This is like Earth, whatever version of whatever, and all this kind of stuff. Like, this is awesome that they're doing this. So it's like the DC television stuff had always been stronger from a writing standpoint, even though the acting stuff is really, really cringy sometimes. And I'm referring to like season 1 of Arrow. It's really cringy, but like the story beats and the acting, not the story beats and the writing are just wonderful. It's just like,
I don't know about story, but I did think the action was good. I thought Arrow,
I like it. Yeah,
Arrow had good action scenes. But yeah, I think those are two examples. But what I'm getting to is, this is not just like another movie. Like this they did something that, again, I'm sure there is examples of it before this, but this is like on this scale, such a big scale of doing it and doing it well. And then you see that it's not that easy to replicate. Like, it's not like you could just throw your characters together and people be like, yeah, that was good. Like, again, Defenders, Justice League, they've struggled to be able to create the same kind of experience for people.
You're absolutely right. This is something very, very special. They pulled off something huge. It was other studios. You're right. They're just like, let's put these people together and people will like that. And like, nope, didn't work like that. You have to actually do the groundwork. You have to do the universe building in order to get us there. You can't just have Batman versus Superman right away. That's stupid. You can't do this. You can't do this.
Well, what's dumb about, I mean, I don't know that, I'm not here to be like, it has to be done this way. What I'm saying is, this worked because, yes, we were invested, but you also could argue people are already invested in Batman and Superman. The reason that one doesn't work, which we've talked about, is because they were like, oh, you went to the last ever story for their first time they're meeting, meaning nothing else will ever matter after this. Like, we already saw what the end result is. Okay. Like,
you already have a Batman that wants to quit. This is stupid. This is not what we want out of Batman. We want a Batman that, because you could
still be like, holy shit, like they're together, but like it just felt like, ugh, like Superman's certainly not having a good time. Batman's out to lunch and he's wrong this whole time. Like, it took away all the fun of them being together.
It took away all the, and it's just like, why is Batman xenophobic all of a sudden? This is weird. It's terrible, but I don't know, it's fucked up. But we're not talking about that movie. No. Although I do like shitting on that movie. That movie, I will say though, the credit to give to that movie is the bat fight scene is awesome. But that is because they basically replicated Arkham Knight's gameplay, and that fighting mechanic in that video game is fantastic. Yeah, the movie. Okay, the thing about this movie too was this. I distinctly remember the best part of this movie being the end credit.
Oh, Thanos.
Thanos. The opening scene where you see the mysterious figure giving away, it's just like, okay, yeah, that's great. It was one of those things in this movie. I'm like, that's a weird way to start a movie. That's a really weird start. And then I'm like, because it's got nothing to do with anything, and you're like, oh, prior to this, cosmic entities were only related to Asgard, right? So Thanos, we didn't even know was coming. First of all, my biggest thing with this was the fact that I was in shock and awe that they pulled off a movie like this, first and foremost. And then to think, oh my God, that's it. That's the event of a lifetime. You're never going to see anything like this again. Can't be done. What's the point? And then they tease you Thanos. And you're like, what the hell? Now they're calling their shots. Now they're like telling you what's going to happen. In terms of marketing,
they did that in Iron Man when they said, I'm here to talk to you about the Avengers initiative. So that is calling a shot. Yeah.
Oh, they're continuing calling these shots and all. You're right. They did that in Iron Man. They're calling these shots, are building this world. And you're like, oh my God, they're not done. There's more coming. What the hell? Because I can't remember prior to the Avengers, with what we knew, did we know that there's a phase 2 after Avengers, or were they like, okay, we got Avengers? And
I'll be honest with you. When you talk to me about phases, I'm just like, I don't know, man. Like,
yeah, I know
it doesn't matter to me. Like, do I think they're gonna be like, oh, we don't want to make any more movies? No. Do I like so?
Right.
To answer your question, no, I don't like, I don't remember, because I just figured if this goes well, they'll just keep making these movies.
No, the reason why I keep bringing up the phases is because to me, the phases, as well as the way they write the stories, is one of the most brilliant marketing and advertisement things ever of all time. In the sense where it's like, yeah, in order to know what happens in this movie, you should know what happens in this. It's like, okay, cool. Like,
but that's not related to phases.
No, it's not. But what I'm saying is the announcement of a phase in itself is marketing. It's like just telling you the slate. Here's the transparency of what we want to do. We're communicating with that. It builds that loyalty with the customers and the clients and the consumers. And I think that's absolutely fantastic. My point for bringing that up is because once they started doing the phase announcements, you're like, holy shit. I don't think there was a phase. I can't remember if there was or not before this, but because to me, after watching the Avengers, I was like, that's it. This is the biggest it's going to get. We're never going to get anything. Like, I legit thought those things in the seat. I'm like, I can't believe I got to experience this. Like, it's one of those things where at that time in my life, I was like, I'm going to tell my son that I watched this in theater one day when we're watching it together and all that kind of stuff. Right. But it's just one of those things where I didn't know if there was more. And then they gave you Thanos, and you're like, what the hell is going to happen? What is the epic level of storytelling and all that kind of stuff? And it created amazing, amazing things. To the point where it just, yeah, I can't remember, but this movie is so monumental for that regard of being able to successfully pull these things off, doing all these storytelling, but like, it really is. This is what Marvel was trying to achieve, and they're going to try to do it again and again. I'm like, yep, I'm here for it. Let's keep going. This is awesome. Loved it.
What a great time. What a great time. I share in your excitement. It's never tied to phases for me. I'm just like, yeah, they'll just keep making movies until it's not profitable, and that's great. I like what they're doing.
I just like the phases because to me, I really highly respect it as the brilliance of the marketing, the advertisement, the business strategy of what it is. Like, I think that's what I respect more of it.
To be clear though, like, it's not really a business play to the extent that like my mom doesn't know what the phases are, but they need people like my mom to go see these movies.
Right.
So like releasing that slate is for us, and we were going to see it anyway.
Oh yeah, you're 100%.
So yes, it creates loyalty. I think that's right, but it's not really like it's more like a brand awareness thing, as more, not awareness even. It's deepening customer loyalty. You're right, but it is already existing customers, not new.
But see, I think I think that's one of the biggest things. Like that fandom, that deep crazed fandom. Does it inspire other people to be like, oh, I should check this out too? What's Ben and Daniel talking about for hours on end? Why is this important to them and all this kind of stuff? And the ability to do this podcast is the wonderful thing to be like, this is why it's important to us and all this kind of stuff. And this is why I think it's great. And this is why I think it's slept on, that people don't take this thing more like look at it more for other than just a comic book movie, like, you know, all this kind of stuff. Like there's a brilliance here that has been something very, very fundamentally special been done. And the scope and the aspect and the reach that they had was just highly applauded in this, for sure. No, this is a special movie. Absolutely a special movie. It does fumble a couple of things. It does a couple of weird things, like how it handles some of the characters and whether or not that was the best way to introduce Hawkeye, whatever, and all those kind of things. But for the most part, this is a fundamentally special movie, despite a lot of the things that we would poke fun of, like the Captain America costume itself is like, oh, that's the ugliest looking thing in the world. Like aside from that, you're just like, this is a great movie. Absolutely fantastic.
It's fun for sure. Do you want to rate it?
Yep. This is going to be a 9.
You're giving it a 9. Excellent.
I'm giving it a 9 because of the nostalgia thing. I will say that. Objectively speaking, it's probably an 8.
Well, you took the words right out of my mouth. I think it's an 8. I think it's a very fun movie, but yeah, the more they put out new movies, the more it goes down on my list in terms of like my favorite MCU movies. But I think it's a great place to start. And as I kept pushing, it's not an easy feat to pull off, and they did pull it off.
Mm-hmm. It's not easy what they did here whatsoever. It is very, very difficult what they did. And it was a fantastic product. Yep.
All right. Well, thank you very much for listening, everybody. This is obviously Spoiled Rotten. We are on the That Shelf Podcast Network, which means we're on the same network as great podcasts such as Bad Game Movies, Black Hole Films, Change of Reels, Composers, No Budget Nightmares, what a great theme song, and more. So please head on over there and get familiar with other podcasts on our network. We also have a backlog of episodes on tdfeverything.com/spoiledrotten. So if you're wanting to listen to older episodes, that's where you need to go. You can also email us at spoiledpodcast@gmail.com. Our Twitter is at tdfspoiled. We're on Apple Music. That's right. No, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Radio Public, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, a whole bunch of places. So please go there. It would be really nice if you could rate us, review us, subscribe, and share with your friends. But yeah, that's all I have to say. Thank you very much, everybody.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
This has been a TDF Everything production, brah.